Hello and welcome, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to Pearson's 2018 Virtual Conference, Beyond the Bell. My name's Amy Winters, and I'm going to be the host for today, and Sarah is our presenter. We're going to be talking about literacy and social studies and how that can empower citizens. So as we go through the webinar today, just know that you'll receive a certificate of participation, and we're going to be sending that out within the week. So look for that in your email. And we would love for you to interact with us on the webinar today. And the way that you're going to do that is through the question box. So you're going to see a question box on the GoToWebinar control panel, and you can type in questions, but you can also type in answers to questions that we ask you. So we'd love your participation. We look forward to it. And I'm really excited for what Sarah has to share with us today. So with that being said, Sarah, I'll pass it over to you and we can get started.
Great, thank you so much. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I do appreciate it. Just give me 1 second here to share my screen. There we go. Okay, so I'm very happy to be here with you today. I'm Sarah Dizak-Vite, and I'll be talking about how literacy and social studies come together to create empowered citizens in our schools. So our goals for today will be to apply reading strategies to social studies texts and then use those informational texts to practice important critical thinking skills. And then we'll talk a little bit about building that content and academic vocabulary, which are so important for students, and learn strategies for how our students can demonstrate that understanding using all 4 modes of literacy: reading, writing, listening, and speaking in the classroom and beyond the classroom, so we hope. So we're going to start by talking about critical literacy and the role of critical literacy in building engaged citizens. So you can just type your answer in the chat box. How familiar are you with critical literacy? Have you heard of it before? Are you somewhat familiar with it? Are you very familiar with it? Are you an expert? You can just go ahead and type your answer in that chat box. Amy, did we get any responses?
So still waiting a second, so we'll give it a...
Great, okay.
Oh, and I'll
give another minute.
I'm gonna officially launch the poll. There you go. So the poll should be up if you want to put in your answer. And it looks like most people are somewhat familiar.
That's great. Okay, so then hopefully we'll build on that prior knowledge and expand it even more into what critical literacy is. So the official definition of critical literacy is that it's the practice of challenging texts. So not just reading them, but really interacting and thinking about them with these different lenses that account for the social, political, economic, cultural, intellectual, and emotional systems that we all function in. So really digging down into those texts and realizing that multiple perspectives exist and that they can be influenced by both the reader's experience and the author's experience. And so we want our students, when they become critically literate, to be asking as they're reading, in whose interest is this text? For what purpose was this text written? Who benefits from the text? And this critical literacy piece that I'm talking about is based on the work of Nancy Fry and Douglas Fisher. And if you're interested, their book is called The Role of Critical Literacy in Citizenship. So when we are thinking about critically literate students, they really take on 4 roles. They are code breakers, meaning makers, text users, and text critics. And they examine the beliefs and values that are underneath the text. And they question the purpose and the message. They take a stance on issues, and even take action and formulate those action steps when necessary. So let's take a little bit of a closer look at these roles. So our students are becoming, as we're teaching them to be critically literate, they're becoming code breakers. And that's just understanding that text at that really surface level, at the structural word level. And then they move beyond that into becoming meaning makers, where they're really comprehending that text at the level at which the author had intended it. And as they move on and become more and more proficient, they become text users, in which they're analyzing the factors that influence the author and the text, including the historical background for the text. And then finally, they become text critics. And that is really having that deep understanding that text is not neutral, and that existing biases can inform calls to action, because we're wanting them to be active, thinking, participating citizens. So the skills that we're looking at for our students to become critically literate are the skills that we're teaching across the curriculum. Good questioning skills, those analysis skills, the thinking skills, developing even empathy and sympathy, and using evidence to form and support both opinions and action. And this is really important today, that our students learn this, because they are part of that global village. There are no borders anymore, and they really need to be culturally aware. And it requires that instant availability of information, requires that readers are able to sort through a barrage of messages, really, and analyzing them for truth and authenticity and integrity. And we hope that these critically literate students are less likely to be misled by misinformation or disinformation, and really be able to focus on that valuable information. And our hope and our belief is that they're less vulnerable to propaganda, because they understand the role of values and beliefs, and consider the sources from which the messages are coming. So they really need to be, as they are connected, they need to be discerning consumers of information. So as we are thinking about the roles that they need to take on, the social studies classroom can be a place to cultivate those characteristics of literate citizens. And when I talk about those characteristics, these are again things that we are kind of teaching across the curriculum. And these particular ones come from the definition of what's a literate individual from the ASCD. And I just kind of wanted to share them because they fit so well with critical literacy. We're wanting our literate citizens to develop independence, to come to understand other perspectives and cultures, to comprehend text, yes, but also to critique it, to use technology and digital media strategically, capably, and I would add to that appropriately. Our students certainly don't have difficulty acquiring the skills necessary to use technology, but it's about how they use that technology. They need to be able to build strong content knowledge and respond to varying demands of an audience. And what we really want them to do is value evidence, to base everything on evidence. So then we find ourselves at this crossroads of citizenship and critical literacy, where they're both supporting the same types of skills, and that critical literacy is essential for really mastering those citizenship characteristics that we're looking for. In other words, social studies is literacy. Social studies is the informational text and issues that we want to teach our students in order to make sure they can become critically literate and participating citizens. So how can we do that? So we're going to talk about some instructional strategies today that support our students in becoming those critically literate students. And the first one is to activate learning with big questions. Right? So I have a chat question for you here, and if you just want to go ahead and answer this question for me, how do you use essential questions or big questions in the elementary classroom to activate learning? In what ways do you display them? Do you have activities? Do you discuss them? Do you revisit them at the end of a chapter? Just give you a moment to think about that and go ahead and type your answers in the questions box on the GoToWebinar panel.
So we have one person that said putting it on their board at the front of the room, so it's one of the first things that students see when they walk in, and then depending on what's being taught, what subject they might change.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
that's a
yeah.
great way to use them.
Yeah. And I think, someone else said something similar, having it, prominent in the room.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's really important so that the students know what their target is and what the bigger picture is. So when we think about activating learning and why we should activate learning, it really does a lot for us as teachers. It allows learners to link new learning to their prior knowledge. So really bringing in that basis for what we're about to learn. It helps the reader make sense of the text or content they're studying. Where does this fit in the bigger picture? Why does this have to do with me? And it really gives them that context that's so important. Their students are more likely to remain engaged with the content then when they understand the bigger context and how it connects to their lives. And it helps students to think thematically and make connections across content, because essential questions cannot be answered simply. Right? Characteristics of a good essential question are that they're open-ended. There's no single final or correct answer. It can't be Googled. They create more questions. They connect to important and transferable ideas. They're often cross-disciplinary. They remain relevant over time and can spark discussion and debate among your students. They require, again, that evidence, the support and justification to answer an essential question. It's really one of the first places that our students learn to use that evidence to support their answers. And they require those higher order thinking skills that they can't be answered just by memorizing or just by recall alone. So some examples of big questions that we might see in the elementary classrooms are, what makes someone a hero? How does life change through history? What makes a great leader? And why do people explore? Okay. But essential questions can't function as they're supposed to function if we don't do something with them. So If I were just to put them on a PowerPoint and not discuss it, not take it any further with the students, it wouldn't do what it's supposed to do. So there are several different strategies that you can use to unlock the big question. For example, you can analyze images that are related to the big question. So if the question that you've posed is, how does life change throughout history? An image like this one of an old-fashioned schoolhouse really helps the students get a hold of that question and see something tangible. So you can take this as to what's different, what's the same, and really lead to that understanding of how does life change throughout history. You could also have the students respond to a prompt that makes the learning personal. So if we look at the other the other big question, why do people explore? You might want to start with asking the students, where would you like to explore and why? And you'll generate from that the overarching reasons that people do explore. And they'll have that personal connection. Oh, I understand. I know what this person was doing. And so they're more likely to connect with that big idea. You could also have your students engage in a kinesthetic activity. If we're looking at the essential question, what makes someone a hero, for example, you might try an activity like this one. Stand like a superhero that you know from a book or a movie and act out your superpower for your partner to guess what it is and how you use it. So this might lead to this will lead to your students being active, getting that hands-on, minds-on learning, and really ready to take the next step into the content that you're looking at. And then finally, you might want to consider using reflective journaling. So if we're looking at that same question, what makes someone a hero? You might ask the students to journal about, if you defended a classmate who was being bullied, would you be a hero? Why or why not? And if you want to go ahead and just type your answer to that question in the questions box while I proceed here, that would be great. I'd be really interested to know if you think that that makes you a hero or not. And again, that why or why not part is so important. The thinking, for the students to explain their thinking, their rationale, their evidence, if you will, for what, if that makes somebody a hero or not, is really the skill that we're trying to get to in the context of a big question. Amy, did we get any answers to?
Yeah, so definitely most people said yes. And another fun thing to do is think about how your students might respond to this too, right? What would they say if you were pretending to be a student? What kind of responses do you think you would get for the why or why not part? So you're welcome to type that in too. But yeah, most people said yes.
Yeah,
Looks like
that would be
to them.
That would be great. Most people do say yes, I find, to this question, but I have had people say no, and I have seen students say no, and that can lead to a really good discussion of what defines a hero. And I think especially at the younger levels, to make the distinction between what's a hero and what's a superhero, because a lot of times the answer no is based on the fact that it took no special powers, or they're thinking superhero. So it can really clarify that misunderstanding, and then an activity like this can help you uncover that prior knowledge to see how deeply they understand the concept. For younger students, instead of journaling, you could do a reflective drawing. So create a badge for a hero, real or imagined, what colors and symbols would be used. And then that really important part again, why? What does this have to do with being a hero? And you'll get some great responses to this. Police badges, fire badges, something that looks like Superman, a variety of responses and creativity from your students. So when we're talking about big questions to activate learning and those activities that we just looked at, which role do you think is supported best through the use of big questions to activate learning? Are they becoming code breakers? Are they becoming meaning makers? Are they becoming text users or text critics?
So you should
So
see
you can
it.
just take the,
Yeah, it should
that's
be
great, thank you.
up on the screen, and you can cast your vote on which of those roles is best supported through big questions. Give it a few more seconds and then share the results real quick. All right. So we had about 33% said code breaker, 67% said meaning maker.
Yes, that's exactly right. Now, these strategies don't always support just one role. They can support multiple roles, and a student would need to be a code breaker and a meaning maker to really gain the understanding from the essential question. That's great. All right, so we're going to move on to our next strategy, which is called tiered vocabulary. And I want to talk just a little bit about the importance of vocabulary for our students. Okay. So there's this phenomenon called a word gap. Okay, and on average, our economically advantaged children know 1,100 words when they get to preschool, while economically disadvantaged children know only 500 words. And that's starting at that preschool level already with a word gap. It doesn't stop, though. The children identified in first grade as struggling readers have 15,000 fewer words in their vocabulary, and that gap just widens and gets bigger. And it's important because the vocabulary of a child entering first grade is a strong predictor of their 11th grade reading comprehension. So we have to get them early and we have to address this vocabulary learning, because one of the biggest contributors to that reading achievement gap is a state of word poverty. And we owe it to our students to help them out of that word poverty and to really grasp the vocabulary so that they can make meaning and keep up with their peers. So we know we have to make that difference in elementary school. And one of the ways that we can do it is through tiered vocabulary. That's a system where you sort vocabulary into the 3 different tiers. It's from Isabel Beck in a book called Bringing Words to Life. And the tier 1 vocabulary words are those words that students use every day, that are very familiar to them, that they come to school knowing. The tier 2 words are high frequency words that are found in many content areas, but they don't have to do with a specific academic area. And then tier 3 are really those domain specific words. They're lower frequency words and they're used in a more specialized context. So what we call academic vocabulary really falls in that tier 2 and a little bit up into tier 3. So 90% of the words in written texts are going to be tier 2 and that bottom of tier 3 words. Okay. So we really want to dig in. So some examples here, like of tier 1 words might be car, water, man, candy. These are things that students know when they come to you for the most part. Those tier 2 words, really help the readers understand that passage, and instruction in these can really add productively to the language ability. And these are words that they may not necessarily have encountered before they come to you, but They're words like considerate, citizen, wants, and needs. And then those tier 3 vocabulary words are really specialized, like colonization, photosynthesis. You'd only expect your students to use them in a very specific context. So let's look at an example of tiered vocabulary. If you happen to be teaching about or talking about the autumn leaves, for example, or the trees in autumn, that tier 1 word would be tree. That's a word that most students are familiar with. The tier 2 word might be something like vary. If you wanted to say that trees vary in shape, size, and color, vary might be a word that you would have to explicitly teach your students. And then the tier 3 word would be like photosynthesis, like trees make fuel through a process of photosynthesis. So the really lower frequency, very domain specific words. So not all words are created equal. So out of these tiered vocabulary, tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3, which words do you think will give your students the most mileage, or the most bang for their buck? Where would you, if you had to budget your time, for example, would you spend your time on tier 1, tier 2, or tier 3 words? You can just go ahead and type your answers in that in the questions box, and I would love to hear what you have to say. Which do you think are the best investment of your time and your students' time?
We've got a good amount of people saying tier 2.
Yes. I think that's a great answer. The words that'll give your students the most mileage are the ones that they will encounter frequently, the ones that they'll see in different contexts, and the ones that they're not innately familiar with, that they're not necessarily hearing all the time. So we want to be able to identify those tier 2 words for a lesson or a piece of text that we're working with. So this is just a little graph that can help you determine, is it a tier 2 word? So basically, it's just these 3 questions. Is it a generally useful word? Does the word relate to ideas that the students know and have been learning? And is the word going to be useful overall in helping students understand text? When you leave social studies and go to literacy time, is that word still going to be useful? So if you answer yes to all 3 of those questions, likely it's a tier 2 word. If not, it might be a tier 3 word. Now, I should say here that not every word in every context is always at the same tier. There could be some that in some lessons are going to be a tier 2 word, or it could be a tier 3 word. There are tier 1 words, of course, will change as the student moves through elementary school. What you would expect to be a tier 1 word in kindergarten, you would not, I mean, what you would expect to be a tier 1 word in 3rd grade, you might not expect it to be a tier 1 word in kindergarten. So this isn't meant to be a rigid structure. It does fluctuate. So let's take a shot and just, these are the words, and just kind of sort them in your mind. If you have a piece of paper in front of you, you can go ahead and write it down. But these words, which ones do you think would be the tier 2 words? Again, you can just chat that in the questions. There are no right or wrong answers. Like I said, words are fluid. They can change category to category, but just from looking at it, reading through it the first time, what do you think might be tier 2 words?
All right, so we have crucial
Mm-hmm.
And another person said coincidence
Mm-hmm.
and momentum. Was it a
Yes.
common?
Uh,
Typical.
that's
Hmm.
that's fantastic. Okay, so we need the just right words for the lesson, right? So this next slide just shows one way that you might sort those words. Those tier 1 words might be mother, happy, corner. Now break could either be a tier 1 or a tier 2 word, depending on the situation. It does have more than one meaning. You can break something, you can break a toy, or you take a break. So that word could be considered a tier 2 word in some instances. And then we heard all of these: coincidence, allude, hostile, and crucial in the tier 2 category, and that's exactly right. And then over in the tier 3, definitely oboe and isotope are those domain-specific words. But we also have pinnacle and momentum, and again, those could flow between tier 2 or tier 3, depending on the context. So you'd really want to focus your instruction in this example on those tier 2 words, because I love this quote from Henry Hazlitt, who said that knowledge of things and knowledge of the words for them grow together. If you do not know the words, you can hardly know the thing. And I think that's so true. And we really need to keep that in mind when we're teaching our students. The words for things are so important. So one of the things that you might want to do or look for are texts that are scaffolded, that include vocabulary and academic vocabulary. So in this instance, this is from our social studies text, My World Interactive, and the vocabulary is the social studies vocabulary: civil rights, protest, race, boycott. Again, there's an argument for some of those being tier 2 rather than tier 3. And then our academic vocabulary is really what we would consider that tier 2 word, considerable. And you'll notice also in the scaffolded text, these are listed over on the left side and also highlighted in the passage. So this is one of the ways that you can support your students in really getting at the meaning of those tier 2 words and internalizing it. So having seen the tiered vocabulary structure, which of the 4 roles do you think is best supported through the use of the tiered vocabulary strategies? Again, this is another poll, I think. So you can just go, and there's no one right answer, of course.
All right, we'll give it a few more seconds, let people vote, and then I'll close it. All right, we'll go ahead and close it, and here's the results real quick.
That's great. Meaning makers, text users, and text critics. Yes, that all of those roles are being built through the use of tiered vocabulary strategies. As are code breakers, because they're learning the definitions of the word. Thanks so much, Amy. So although we want to focus the majority of our time on tier 2 vocabulary, we don't want to forget about that tier 3 vocabulary. We also do need strategies to support student acquisition of the tier 3 vocabulary. One of the strategies that you can use for that is called a connect to. And so this is an example of some second grade social studies vocabulary. And you would ask your students, using this sentence frame, I would connect blank and blank because blank to fill in those blanks with the vocabulary words, and then the most important part, because, and their reasoning. So what do you think, which ones do you think your students might connect? And the most important part of this strategy, and it's really important to use the sentence frame for it, because the because part, where they're defending their thinking, explaining their thinking, thinking about their own thinking, using those metacognition skills, it's very important. That's the most important part of this sentence frame. So you might want to have this printed out, or have it as a manipulative for your students. If you teach pre-readers, you could do this with images and pictures instead of with the vocabulary words themselves. But it's very important that it has those three parts. I would connect blank and blank because blank. So what do you think your students might connect?
You can put that in the question box, what you think might connect. So we have civil rights and protest.
I think that's a great one.
And then also Underground Railroad opportunities.
Oh, I like that one. Yes, because the Underground Railroad provided opportunities for people. Those are great. And you'll notice on those lists that considerable opportunities and trait are some of those fluid words that might go back and forth between Tier 2 and Tier 3, depending on your instructional situation.
We also have civil rights and race. That's another one.
Yeah, civil rights and race. So with the benefit of this strategy is that it really guides the student to think about the deeper meaning of the word and not just memorize a definition, because they really need to understand the word in order to make these connections. So you're not only reviewing definitions here, but getting to that deeper understanding so that the students can own the vocabulary and try to close that reading gap, that word gap that we see too often among our lower achieving students. So in thinking about the Connect To strategy, which of the four roles do you think is best supported through the use of the Connect To vocabulary strategy? And just select them on the poll. I'll just leave that up for another few seconds.
Perfect. All right, and here's the results.
Great, meaning makers and text users. Exactly, that's where the Connect To really hits at the heart of those two, meaning makers, becoming meaning makers, and proficient text users. Okay, so we've seen several different strategies that work the students through being code breakers, meaning makers, now works to text users. How do we get them to that text critic level? That's a little bit more difficult, and it's a little bit more involved for us. So our next strategy is going to be about critical thinking with informational text. Okay? So remember that social studies is the source really for your informational text, and it's so important that students work with informational text to build these skills. So let's take a look, for example, at a primary source, a written primary source. So you may want your students, and of course this depends on where you are on the K to 6 spectrum and which students you are working with. A primary source can be a song, or it can be something written like this. It can even be a visual, which we're going to look at in just a moment. But what you'd like to have your students do is really engage in close reading of the primary sources. So some strategies that you might use are to have your students read the background and the primary source with a partner so that they can discuss it and really dig into it. Again, you'll notice that these strategies kind of nest. You can see the vocabulary strategy again at use here. For the academic and the excuse me, regular vocabulary. Okay, and utilize those close reading strategies, highlighting, annotating, rewording, all of those things that really help our students dig out the meaning of a primary source. And then you might pair that primary source with, for example, an image like this one. Right? And a great strategy to use with these images, the images like this, is the See, Think, Wonder, which you might be familiar with already. So the first question that you ask is, what do you see? And you really need to contain the students here to what they see. And while I'm talking, if you'd like to go ahead and type in the question box something that you see, that would be great. So we can share that out. If you need to direct your students a little bit more, you might ask them to write down 5 things they see in this picture, or ask them, what do you see in this picture that you think everybody must see when they look at this picture? Or ask them, what do you see when you look at this picture that you think nobody else noticed? Okay, and it's really a great way to delve in, and we're sticking to what do you see, not anything else, but just what you see. Like, for example, I see a lot of men. Did anybody say what they see in it, Amy?
Yeah, so we have lots of, along those lines, mustaches and beards.
Mm. Yes, lots of mustaches and beards.
uh,
Must have been the fashion at the time.
yeah, and then a bottle of something that the man's holding
Yeah.
up at the top, and
Mm-hmm.
then a train, a large group of men,
Mm-hmm.
2 men shaking hands, like they agreed on something, and that's the
Yes.
second grader, interpretation, right? And most of the men are wearing hats. Um,
Oh, they
yeah,
are.
yeah. So those are a few things that came in.
That's great. So those are the kinds of answers that you will hear to what do you see. So that's just getting the students to look at an image and to see it through everybody's eyes, and also to see it from their unique point of view. And then you would ask them, what do you think now that you have seen this? What does it make you think? Um, so again, you can go ahead and type your responses in that question box. What do you think it will make your students think, or what does it make you think? I know some more sophisticated students, really at the higher levels, sometimes they notice that these are all white men, and sometimes they notice that some of them look like they're working men, and some of them look like they're not. Some of them are dressed fancy, some of them are not. So there's a lot of different things that they notice, and a lot of different things that they think. One of the things that comes out, that they think it's a celebration
Mm-hmm.
of some kind.
And that, yep, as an answer.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Anything else about what anybody thought it might be?
Yeah, I think celebration was
Mm-hmm.
the main one. Wondering, yeah, what's the occasion, right? Like, why was a picture even taken?
Right. So you think, it makes me think this is something important because there was a picture taken of it. And again, that's supporting the thinking with evidence. I think it's a celebration because there's the champagne and the people shaking hands. So now they're interpreting the visual image. So they've paid attention to the close detail, just like close reading. They paid attention to close detail with the seeing, and now they're thinking. And then the final question to ask them is, what do you wonder? And normally the responses to this will range, from I wonder what it is they're celebrating to I wonder what that guy standing on the train up there is thinking. And anything is fine. You can certainly wonder anything, but it should be based on the visual evidence. So when you have your students do a close reading of a primary source and then look at an image, they are comparing the two of them. And so you definitely want to then take advantage of both of those primary sources. And you can even do a connect to here with this, where they are thinking a little more deeply and connect two figures in the picture. And again, remember, because, why, and they have to use the visual evidence. And then that connection part, which is so important. So I would have the students look at both sources together and then answer a question that applies to both of those primary sources. So that particular image was the joining of the transcontinental railroad. Okay, so that can lead you into a discussion, of the railroad and the history of the time. So those close reading of primary sources combined with those visual literacy, so we're talking about those critical literacy skills and visual literacy skills, and you put them together, and you really get the meaning from that informational text, and you begin to experience it and then understand the perspective of the people. So these are people that were in favor of this, they're celebrating. So now we're getting into the other roles. I just gave away the answer to this one. But our final poll here, which of the four roles do you think is best supported through the use of close reading and visuals? Another strategy you might want to use with an image, just while we have the poll running, is one called "If Images Could Talk." So you pick out a person in the picture, and if that person could say something, what do you think he would say? And again, it has to be based on the visual evidence that the student sees in the picture. Because we really are wanting them to get the meaning from the image. All right, so we'll just leave that poll up for a couple more seconds and then.
All right, so we got about 50-50 code breaker and text critic.
Yeah. Yes, they are code breaking when they're doing the close reading. That's absolutely right. And they are also taking these steps to become the text critic because they're beginning to understand about perspective and people's point of view through the combination of those two primary sources. So how does this really develop empowered citizens? When you take the social studies content and the items that are available in a social studies program, and you combine that with critical literacy, that's where you begin to develop those empowered citizens who are informed and will take action. One of the ways that we do this in social studies is to study certain people. These people who offer models for citizenship, whether they're good models or not good models, and they encourage students to support their ideas with evidence and judging, is this a good model of citizenship? And then the citizenship feature always provides opportunities for action in everyday life. This is the citizenship feature from our program, My World Interactive. And it's meant to combine that social studies content and those literacy skills to begin to create empowered citizens. And so this one might lead to a discussion about protesting laws that you might think are unfair. Okay. And the call to action is to research an issue. So we're not having all of our students run a demonstration or anything, just taking baby steps into becoming involved in that citizenship. So once we've empowered students by closing that word gap, by using tiered vocabulary and big questions to activate their learning, then they're able to unlock that social studies content and they become empowered to apply their learning outside of the social studies classroom. So all of the examples that I showed you today are from our Pearson Social Studies program, which is called My World Interactive. It's, like it says, an interactive social studies program for students, which is based on an inclusion of literacy skills and really providing that scaffolding for students for literacy as well. So I'd like to just thank you for being here with me tonight. I really do appreciate it. Oh, it's night where I am. It's almost 6 o'clock. Might not be where you are. But I do appreciate and your participation. And on behalf of Pearson, I thank you for joining our webinar.